And now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's fashion, Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And now, here's Ted.
Thank you, Becky, and welcome one and all. Appreciate you joining us here on the Ted Wallachin Podcast. And for those of you who've been visiting our website at www.tedwallachin.ca, hope you're listening back on some of the old programs that we've done, and hope you continue to do so and sign up and get ready to receive some information from us. Got a great show this week. My special guest began his legendary career, and I mean legendary career in radio, as a part-time employee at the age of just 17. A vast majority of his career, more than 50 years, was working for Chum Radio, first on the AM side and then over at Chum FM. He is a member of the Canadian Music and Broadcast Hall of Fame and recently had a street named after him in Toronto. Currently, he hosts a weekly Roger Ashby oldie show on iHeart radio stations, and his voice can be heard on CNIB audiobooks as well as on AMI television. Roger Ashby.
It's 10:06 from Chum, Canada's #1 music station, with Roger Ashby this morning and Redbone.
Roger, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for taking the time. I really do appreciate it.
And great to see you, Ted. It's been a while.
It has been a while, and I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said, "Did you ever work with Roger?" I said, "No, we worked across from each other for a number of years." And I mean, you started radio a bit before I did, and so I've certainly known you, and we've met on many occasions, but we never have worked together. Which is unfortunate. But we do share one thing in common: is you and I both started with this little Seabreeze turntable, pretending that we were working on the radio.
Well, that's
I
true.
love that story.
Well, I was 10 years old. I knew from the time I was 10 that I wanted to get into broadcasting, and my dad was pretty good with carpentry work, so he built me a little radio station, a little U-shaped setup where I had turntables and a Simpson Sears tape recorder and reel-to-reel tape. And a microphone that was connected to the radio in the kitchen so my mother could hear me. Apart from that, I was talking to the four walls. But I did that from the time I was 10 until the end of high school. And I did it almost daily. Other kids would be at the baseball or football game or whatever, and I'd be downstairs playing radio. But I always said to myself, by the time I got my first part-time job, I had 7 years experience.
But I understand that you recently came upon some letters that your mother had written, correspondence,
I did.
where she talked about at the age of like 3, Roger's playing radio again.
Yeah, that's right. That one particular letter that I discovered after she passed away, that was sent to my aunt, and it said, Roger's playing radio again. And I looked at the date, and I would have been 3.5 years old.
Wow.
So, I don't know. I don't know how to explain
I can't remember that far back. I had this discussion with a friend the other day. I mean, how far can you remember back? I'm thinking maybe like when I was 4 or 5 or whatever. But to have to be at the age of 3.5 or even 3 to be playing radio, you got to think to yourself, what made that kind of an impression on you?
I don't know. I do remember, like a lot of us probably, playing television, where you'd get a cardboard box and cut the bottom out, and you'd sit in there and pretend you're on TV. I actually remember doing that as a young kid, but I don't remember playing radio that young. So to read that letter was quite an eye-opener.
Yeah. Now, didn't your dad, you had a fascination for buses as well, right?
Yeah.
And didn't your dad build you like sort of a mock bus in the basement as well?
He did. We had an unfinished basement, and between all the support beams downstairs, he built me a shell of a bus. So there was a door with a spring on it that I could open from the driver's seat, which he built. He built a driver's seat, and we put an old steering wheel on it. He made a fare box like they used to have years ago.
Yeah.
And, maybe half a dozen seats behind me. And again, I was by myself. I'm an only child, and I didn't have any friends who wanted to come and sit on the bus with me. So I was down there by myself. And I was in Brantford at the time, and there were only 7 bus routes. I remember this distinctly. And I
Hmm.
traveled on all 7 bus routes when I was 8, 9 years old
Yeah.
by myself. No 8 and 9-year old would go on the bus by themselves these days. But
I won't go by myself.
no, exactly. So I traveled all 7 routes and I had them all memorized in my head. So this sounds pretty weird, but I would sit there and I would play the route in my head to the exact length of time that it took the bus to travel the route. And I just had a fascination. I made notes of the numbers of the buses that traveled on each route. And I got to tell you, even today, every bus I see on the road, I look at. I look to see where it's going, what the route number is. I'm still fascinated with them, but just city buses, not Greyhound buses or Go buses, just city buses.
Yeah. You think about it, you were sort of ahead of the curve because you had you combined the two things, your love of music and your knowledge of music and being a bus driver, you could have been like the original sort of cash cab. You could have brought people on the bus and thrown oldies trivia at them and see how far they can go.
Well, hey, is it too late?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Why not? Yeah, you like many people I've interviewed over the years who started in radio. They kind of nudge their way into a job by hanging around the local radio station, especially if you were from a smaller town, which you were, and you kind of got to know somebody who worked there, and eventually they'd let you into the building and you fetch coffee, and that's how it all got started for
Mhm.
you, isn't it?
It is. I moved from Brantford when I was 13, so I never really got to know anybody in radio there. I knew of them, but I didn't know them. And when I was in grade 10, we moved to Kitchener Waterloo, and so I would have been 15 then. So that's when I started hanging around the local station. Got to know some of the part-time people who worked there on the weekends, and they'd have me up, and I'd sit in with them maybe on their all-night show. And one guy in particular who I really enjoyed being with, his name was Gil Gardner, and he would give me the old commercial transcriptions that they'd be throwing out. They didn't need anymore, and I'd take them
Hmm.
home and I'd use them in my own radio station. I'd play them as commercials. So yeah, and then at the end of well, no, during high school, I got a part-time job at CKKW, which still exists under different call letters, as a board op. And then the FM station went on the air for the first time in Kitchener in 1967, and they hired me to do 2 weekend shows. So
Hmm.
that was a pretty good break. Now we only talked 4 or 5 times an hour, but you know what it was like back in those days. But
Yep.
that was pretty exciting. And then from there, I went to CKOC.
Now, who hired you? Was it Nevin Grant?
No, it wasn't Nevin. It was a guy named Larry Gavin. And the way I got in there was their morning man at CKOC had been hired by CKKW, Gary Parkhill. And Gary came, and I got to know him. And he said, they're looking for a swing jock, at CKOC. I said, oh, really? So he said, yeah, call Larry Gavin. So I called Larry Gavin, went for an interview, and got the job. And I went in as a swing jock that just shortly before my 18th birthday. No, 19th birthday. And Nevin
Hmm.
was there. I got to know Nevin really well. He was a great mentor, and I spent a year.
Nevin Grant, for those people who are not familiar with him, unfortunately passed away a number of years ago. He ran CKOC. Wonderful, wonderful man, a brilliant radio and a brilliant music guy. Like he knew stuff about music,
Yeah.
kind of like you. Knew a lot of stuff about a lot of musicians, and a lot of B-side knowledge, as we like to say.
Well, we had great chats about all that stuff. We had a real good bond because of what we enjoyed in the music industry, and he eventually became a boss there, and he was a very likable man, Nevin Grant.
Hmm.
Yeah, I owe him a lot, and I'm so sad that he passed away.
Yeah, me too. You spent in total what, a year and a
Just a
half
year.
at OC?
Just a
Just a
year, a
year.
very memorable year. I can recall all kinds of things I did and where I lived. And I lived in a boarding house when I first went there. And, that's quite an experience. There were 10 guys in this boarding house, 5 bedrooms. So 2 guys to a bedroom. And
Wow.
I shared a room with a guy named Ed. He was from Nova Scotia. He was so funny. You know, I was so young. I was just barely 19. And these guys, you know, they come from other provinces. They were working at Stelco and places like that. They couldn't afford an apartment, so they were at this boarding house. But we ate dinner tonight, every night together. And it was just a real riot. I'm so glad I experienced that.
So it comes 1969, and you get this opportunity to work at Chum, which is an amazing thing for people who don't understand. This is the number one market in the country and the number one top 40 station. Thanks to a guy named Rick Murray.
That's right. Rick and I went to high school together, and I got him interested in radio with the little mock station that I had set up at home. And we used to do that together. And then we both thought someday we would like to work at Chum. Well, he got there before me because he went as a board op. I can't remember exactly how he got the job, but through a connection. And he was a board op, a very good board op. And he had been there maybe 6 months before I was hired. And my understanding is that J. Robert Wood, the program director, said to Rick, do you know anybody young around your age who would be suitable to do the all night show? Because this is when Bob Wood was making all of his big changes, you know, out with the old and
Mhm.
with the new. And most of the new were Americans, but he wanted a Canadian who would work for peanuts on the all night show. So Rick recommended me. And he called me in Hamilton, asked me to come down for an interview, and I got the job. Funny story that he said, "Okay, we'll pay you what was it, 600 a month," and I think I was making 500 a month in Hamilton. So I thought I would give them $600 a month to work
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
But my dad had always told me, you know, think about it, never make the decision too quickly. So I went to the morning man at CKOC at the time, who was probably 40 years old, but he seemed like an older person to me at the time. And I said, Jack, it was Jack Stevens, what would you do? And he said, well, how much do you think you want? And I thought, well, 800. He said, and you call them back and you tell them you can't come for any less than 800. I thought, well, what if they say no? So,
Exactly.
you know, I didn't know what to do. So I did. I called him and I said, I really want to come. I said, but I can't come for less than 800 a month. And, you know, right away he said, okay. Then I thought I should have
Wow.
asked for 9.
I know.
But
Did you ever see that remember the old Mary Tyler Moore show where there was
yeah.
one episode where Mary and Lou were discussing salary, and then he says, you write down on a piece of paper how much you want, and I write down on a piece of paper how much I want to pay you, and then we'll swap papers.
Mm-hmm.
So she writes down a figure, gives it to him, and he writes down a figure, and they both open up the figure, and Lou realizes that he is offering her more than she was going to ask him, and goes crazy.
That's funny.
2.5 years. I mean, when you first walked in, I mean, how daunting was that to walk into 1331 Young?
Well, you know, how well do I actually remember that? I don't think I found it daunting. I found it exciting. I was so
Yeah,
thrilled. And one of the first people I met was Hal Weaver. I don't know if you remember him, and
sure, sure.
Chuck McCoy, who I still keep in touch
Hmm.
with. And they were also very nice. Chuck was great. Chuck was just, you know, come on in, kid. And he preceded me, and then I did the all night show. So I don't think I found it daunting. I just thought, well, they want me here. I'm really excited to be here, and let's go. You know,
Now, when you arrive there and you're doing the all night show, do you have an op, or are you opping yourself?
both. I had uh, initially, yeah, I had an op initially, and then things changed and I didn't. So I'd be running my own board, and then later I would have an op. So one way or the other, I was happy. I didn't care whether I had an op or not, although it was certainly nice to have one, just simply for the company in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
We even had all night newscast then. Larry Wilson at one time did the all night news on Chum when I was
Wow.
there. Brian Williams. We still Brian and I still talk about that.
Well, you did the 2.5 years, and it's the world's greatest learning ground, the all night
Yeah.
show, because you know yourself for the most part after like 1 o'clock, especially back in those days, nobody's really around. There's
Yeah.
not that many people listening, right? So you can screw up left, right, and center. Once you start getting closing in on the early morning hours, though, you better start sounding a little bit better
Yeah.
because you're getting close to the morning man's time, right?
Well, yeah, that's true. But in a city the size of Toronto, even then, there were the all-night cabbies, there were the
Yeah.
insomniacs, and you get to know them on the phone. I got to know people's voices on the phone. And I remember this one fellow called me up. I even remember his name. His name was Bob, and he wasn't much older than me, but he grew up in Toronto, and I was anxious to learn more about the city. So he said, "Let's meet for coffee," and he drove me all around Toronto, showing me all kinds of different things about the city, which I thought was great. And it helped me get to know the city because I really believe you should know the city you're working in. Too many of
Yeah.
these people, you travel from one city to another, and it's a very transient business, as you know, and they never really get to know the city they're working in. And because of
Hmm.
that, because of him doing that for me, later, like 10 years later, when we would hire somebody new, Bob Wood would ask me, show the guy the city. And we'd get in the car and we just drive from Etobicoke to Scarborough. I'd point out all the points of interest. And they were really grateful for it because they felt like they knew the city and they'd only been there a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and in how many cases when you hear even to this day people on the radio or people on television who are not from the city come into the city and start mispronouncing names of streets,
Right. Oh, yeah.
Strachan
Yeah.
Avenue, and the
Yeah.
thing and it's like, oh my God, it's
I know.
terrible.
Yeah. You've got to do your research on stuff like that.
You move from the all night show to middays.
I by that time I had wanted to get off the all night show. I wanted to move up, and I bugged Bob with a lot. And he said, "You're not ready. You're not ready. You're not ready." And then one day he said, "Okay." He said, "We're going to give you 11 to 3 because the morning show ended at 9. Jay Nelson finished at 9. Then they had the John Gilbert talk show from 9 to 11,
Right,
and
right.
I did 11 to 3, which was what a great shift that was. You didn't have to get up early, and you were finished by you'd be out of there by 4 o'clock. So yeah, I did that for another 2.5 years, I think it was.
Now, at one point, you sort of dipped your toes into programming.
I did because I always thought no matter what your job was, the idea was to work your way up.
Yeah,
So you would in radio, you'd get out of the all night show, get into the midday show, and then I became Jay Nelson's replacement when he went on vacation. So I got a taste of the morning show. So I did various time periods, and by 1975, I thought, well, maybe it's time I get into programming because I was already doing some work in the library, in the music department. So Bob
mm,
Wood brought me on. I was really the assistant PD, although I was never given the title. And I realized after a couple of years, this isn't what I want to do. And
yeah,
so did he. He realized that I wasn't the guy to do it. And I was in that position, I guess, for about 4 years. And then in 1979, I came out of programming. It was a mutual agreement. I thought, I want to be on the radio. That's what I got into this business for.
yeah.
Despite the fact that thought I should move up into programming, I thought, no, this isn't for me. But I'm sure glad I had a chance to do it to find that out. And
Now, did you get into radio because of your passion for music, or did you get into radio because you wanted to for because you had a passion for communications?
yeah, I wanted it's more communication than music. I always knew the music, but the idea of getting into radio was to be able to impart that knowledge and just talk to people. People like
Yeah,
John Sprague, who did the midday show on Chum back in the '60s, early '60s, and he became a bit of a friend afterwards. He was one of my mentors because he was just that pleasant sounding person on the radio. He wasn't funny necessarily. He wasn't, he was just a nice, warm sound on the radio.
right.
And that's what I thought. This is great. That's what I want to do. I remember my dad saying to me, "Well, if you can be as good as Fred Davis, you'll go a long way." Remember Fred Davis?
Yeah,
No, I
of
think,
course.
see, the thing about Fred Davis too was he was just kind of a regular guy. He did his job well as moderator of the show, and he was pleasant, and I thought, I like that. I never considered myself an entertainer or a comedian by any means. I wasn't a Jack Armstrong or Scott Carpenter or any of these people. I just wanted to talk on the radio and play the music that I liked.
Yeah. But you are a music aficionado. I mean, you are probably one of the most knowledgeable people that I know when it comes to, especially the oldies music. And I mean, there's a lot of people who love listening to music, and they can name that tune in three bars. But you can name that tune, tell you who wrote it, and who the producer was, and what other songs that person had written for somebody else. You know,
Well,
you know
yes,
what I'm saying?
I did have an avid interest. I still do, but not in today's music. I don't think I've
No.
listened to current music since I retired. But growing up, I followed the music. I followed the producers. I followed the writers, the artists themselves, and I just thought. Now that was pop music, and it was singles. When album rock came along, I know half a dozen Pink Floyd songs. I couldn't tell you anything about their albums or Jethro Tull or people like that. That
Mm.
never appealed to me. It was pop music that I was always interested in. I remember when Sugar Sugar was number one. And that was the number one song the day I started at Chum. No, it was number one song the week that my picture first appeared on the Chum chart. And I
And I was
remember
going to ask you that.
I was being in the bathroom. I was in the bathroom, and one of the guys from FM came in at the same time, and he was playing Barclay James Harvest or something, which is a pretty good band. And he said, "What are you playing?" I said, "Oh, I'm playing Sugar Sugar by the Archies." And he rolls his eyes at me and says, "Have fun." Like it was condescending because we're on FM. We play the real music. You guys are playing the pop stuff. But sorry, that's what I liked. I still do.
Yeah. I think you described the difference between Chum AM and Chum FM as it being like the Berlin Wall separating the two radio
Well,
stations because
kinda. I mean,
they were so different.
there was no animosity. Nobody really
No.
disliked anybody, and we wouldn't really see a lot of each other because, as you say, we'd each be on one side of the hall. But if you happen to meet in the bathroom or if you're walking down the hallway, I knew them all. And they knew us. And I mean, John Donaby was there for a long time. Brian Master, great guys. I still see them. Uh, so yeah, a bit of I know what you mean by Berlin Wall, but there was certainly a difference in approach, but there was no animosity.
Yeah. So eventually Jay Nelson leaves. Tom Rivers takes over for Jay Nelson. Tom gets let go, one of, I think, four times
Yeah,
or something.
exactly.
And my understanding
I
was
think his grandmother died
that
twice.
not that I should talk, but so he leaves, and then you get the gig. Now the morning show is unlike any program on the radio station
Yeah,
because you've got the people at their most vulnerable,
yeah.
like they're literally naked listening to you,
Yeah, I suppose so.
right?
Well, I think one of the reasons that I got that show when Tom left was because I wasn't doing a full time shift. As I said, I came out of programming and I was on swing from another 2.5 year stint from '79 into early '82 when he left. So, and I had been filling in for him too when he was on vacation, as I had for Jay Nelson. So I was given the opportunity to do the morning show, but it was supposed to be temporary,
Yeah.
and we called it Lotto 6 to 9 because every once in a while they would bring somebody in to audition for a day or two, like Joey Reynolds, who I thought was absolutely horrible. I think Joey Reynolds was great in 1962, but by the time the
Now
80s
he was
rolled
from
around,
Buffalo, right?
yeah, from Buffalo. I don't mean to put him down, but I thought, why would you bring this guy in at this stage of his career to do the 1050 Chum morning show? And they'd bring in other people too, and they'd call me up and say, okay, we'll take tomorrow off. We got so and so coming in to audition. So I did it temporarily for 3 years. And I was paired up with Mike Holland, who I really enjoyed working with. But I've always felt that our roles weren't defined. If you've got a 2 or 3 person morning show, you've got to define what each person does, what they're responsible
Hmm.
for, what their duties are.
Yeah.
And our roles were never defined. So we both, I think, felt a little lost at times. And then they took me off the morning show and brought John Major in to work with Mike Holland. And I think that was because Mike and John were pretty good friends, and Mike didn't want to do the morning show at all after a while. wasn't because of me, I don't think. They just didn't want to do mornings. But they said, okay, well, we'll bring Major in and he'll work with you. He said, okay. So they worked together for a while until that fell apart. So here
Hmm.
I am now. I've done 3 years of the morning show on AM, and I'm kind of out of work. And here, let me, before I say anything else, I want to tell you that with the Waters family as owners, you never felt like they were going to let you go. They would always find something for you. And that's what they did for me. That's what they did for me when I came out of programming. That's what they did for me when I came off the AM morning show.
Hmm.
It wasn't like, well, sorry, don't need you anymore, like it is
Yeah.
today. So
Yeah.
Ross Davies, who was program director, and Duff Roman over on FM,
Right.
said, well, heck, if they don't want you over there, come on over here. And my timing is right because they hadn't really found a permanent morning show person. So I was given that opportunity. So I was kind of in the right place at the right time for a number of things.
So now, when you go from AM morning show to the FM side doing the morning show, what are the biggest differences? I would imagine the amount of time that you have to fill talking versus playing music would be number
Well, by
one.
the time I went over, Ted, they had started to change to become more of a top 40 sound. They had gotten
Hmm.
away from the Chum FM of the 70s, and they were changing into a more contemporary station. I think they knew that the music days on AM were numbered, and FM was the place to be. So it was a pretty tightly formatted show. Of course, I did get a chance to talk more because it was the morning show, but they were all the move was underway already.
Ted Wallachin returns in a moment.
I've had the great fortune to say that I've been associated with one of Toronto's finest names in men's clothing for more than 25 years. Tom's Place. Founded by Tom Mahalick's father in 1958, Tom's Place offers brand name men's apparel at unbeatable prices. But more than that, they boast a long serving, knowledgeable, and friendly staff that can assist you whether you're looking for casual or formal attire. And they have plenty of first class tailors on site. In addition, Tom and his family are well known for their philanthropic work. So if you're looking to deal with great people who can fulfill your clothing desires at outstanding prices, do yourself a favor and visit Tom's Place. They're open weekdays from 11 to 6, Saturdays 10 to 5, and Sundays noon to 5. You'll find Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market, or check them out online at toms-place.com. Tom's Place will suit you. Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1-866 309 0387. That's 1-866 309 0387. Or you can get her at info at etpcanada.ca. That's info at etpcanada.ca.
Now back to Ted Wallachin.
So you found the sound. We're so happy to have you around. CHUM 1050 Toronto.
It was funny because at one time it was Chum AM that was the support beam for the Chum radio. I
Yeah.
mean, it supported without Chum AM, Chum FM would have never have survived.
Right.
And then suddenly the whole world turned upside down.
Yeah, it did. It just completely reversed. And, Rick Hodge had already been there when I came over. So I worked
Yeah.
with Hodgie. And then a year later, it was thought we should bring in a third person and it should be female.
Right.
So do you want me to tell you the story of Marilyn's arrival?
Well, I understand that there were numerous people who came in to apply for the job, most of whom were not prepared for it at all because they just didn't have the experience.
Well, that's true. There weren't, this is 1986, and there weren't a lot of female broadcasters, especially
Right.
on top 40 kind of radio. You'd have them on the CBC, and you'd had the
Yeah.
Betty Kennedys of the world, but you didn't have a lot of disc jockeys who were female. And we auditioned probably 100 actresses, and they could act, but they couldn't just be themselves behind a microphone when we did our audition.
Right.
So we
Right.
got really frustrated, and we had found no one. And uh, as luck would have it, Marilyn came to town. Her husband had been transferred from Calgary. She came with him, and she had done some radio and TV work in Calgary. And she came into Chum, and Ross Davy said, "There's a woman named Marilyn Dennis. Would you do an audition with her?" So I did, and within minutes, and I'm sure she'll tell you the same thing, we thought we had known each other a lifetime. She was the brother I never had. She was the sister I never had, and we clicked. That chemistry thing happened, and
Yeah.
and she began. She didn't start immediately with us for the complete show. She started out in the newsroom doing traffic, which was, I don't know why they ever did that, but that's the way it was. And then after a while, she just became part of the show.
Now, was she working, doing her television show at the same time, or did that come sometime later?
That came a year or two later. Yeah, I think it was '88 when she got her TV show.
Right.
Yeah, and she just retired.
Which she
recently.
just retired from.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
that's another one of those amazing careers, and you're right. Back in the days, with the exception of CBC or Betty Kennedy over at CFRB, women there weren't many rules for women
No.
on top 40 radio.
No.
I remember a time when I first started working in radio, where we had a rule where you couldn't play two female singers
Yeah,
back to back.
I know. I remember that. But whenever that comes up in conversation with people, they say, "Oh, well, that's sexist," or "That's why would you ever have a rule like that?" And I always think to myself, because for a while there weren't a lot of female singers having hit records. There was Brenda
That's true
Lee, there
too.
was Connie Francis, and then there was the odd one-hit wonder. But
Yeah.
seriously, there weren't as many. So if you only had half a dozen female artists to choose from on your playlist, why would you play them all back to back?
But I think it was also the fact that it was sexist.
Well, I guess so.
You mentioned the Chum chart earlier, and I wanted to talk to you about that because to me, growing up, I mean, Chum was the radio station that I listened to. Chum was the radio station I wanted to work at. I never did get a chance to do so. But, and like so many other hundreds of thousands of people collected Chum charts, and every Thursday, whenever they came out, I think it was,
Mhm.
when the first Chum chart came out with your picture on it, how was that?
Oh man, it was like I'd become, a worldwide celebrity or whatever. Just
Yeah.
I thought, my God, my picture is on the Chum chart. It's sitting in a rack in Sam the Record Man and A&A Records in downtown Toronto with my picture on it. It was
Yeah.
just blew me away. Yeah,
And they're giving away from free.
yeah,
So, a lot of people are going to grab them.
that's right.
The old adage, if it's free, it's for me, right?
Yeah, and every once in a while, somebody would send me an old Chum chart, and say, "Do you remember this?" And I certainly do. I've got all the Chum charts from 1961 on. I collected them week by week when I was a kid, and then I continued to collect them when I was working there. So I've got them all
Wow.
here right beside me in big binders.
So you still have your original Chum chart.
Yeah, I do.
I guess somebody had compiled a book on a Chum chart book some years ago.
Yes, his name was Ron Hall, and I still talk to Ron from time to time. He did an excellent job putting that book together, and I'm looking at a copy right now on my bookshelf over there. Um, I still get people saying, "Well, where can I get that Chum chart book?" And I say, "Well, I don't think you can anymore. It's discontinued." I give them Ron's email address, but I don't know that he can help them out. But it was a very good book. Yeah.
So, although you retired, as you like to call it, back in 2018 from Chum FM, you continue. You're still on the air at a weekly syndicated Roger Ashby oldies show.
Right.
So you haven't really retired, because I get the feeling you can't. You're one of those guys who can't really retire.
Right. And I think you're the same. You're doing your podcast now, and
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for most people who are in radio for a length of time, it's in your blood, and you can't just walk away from it. And it's not just
Yeah,
radio. There are a lot of jobs that people have trouble just walking away from. I know a
sure.
dental surgeon right now who's having a difficult time dealing with the fact that he just may not be able to do it much longer, and
Yeah,
it's stressful. So he'll probably end up doing some consulting or something. But that happens to a lot of people, and retirement really isn't. I don't think it's all that easy. You talk to somebody who
yeah.
maybe got
You're
a
right.
humdrum job, and they say, "Gee, I can't wait until I'm 65. I'm going to retire. I'm going to relax. I'm going to go boating or whatever I'm going to do." And you can only boat or golf so much.
Yeah.
You have to have something to do. I've seen people fall apart, successful people who no longer have an identity as someone in the workforce, and they just kind of fall apart as the next few years go by, and it's such a shame. So you've got to do something. I'm glad I'm doing this one show a week. It runs on a few stations around the province. Actually, a station in Manitoba, New Brunswick that runs it, and it's on the iHeartRadio app, and it keeps me busy.
I get the feeling that people like you and me, once we hit a certain age when nobody will really want to listen to us, we'll just revert back to our youth and start pull out the old sea breeze and start talking to nobody in the basement.
Well, I
You know?
I record my show from home. I record it. I do the voice tracks from home.
Yeah.
Bell Media was kind enough to get me a retro-looking microphone. It's a great old-fashioned. It's not old, but it's old-fashioned looking. So I use that, and I record my voice tracks to an iPod, and then I send them to my producer, who puts the music and the jingles in.
But right now, you talk about consulting. Do you get people who are younger people who may be friends of children that are friends of you,
Mm-hmm.
your friends' children?
Yeah,
This
I
is
know
what
what you
I'm
mean.
trying to say. If I can speak
Yeah.
English, who ask you for advice in terms of getting into radio, because I wonder what kind of an answer you would give, knowing what's gone on in this industry in the last half dozen years.
Well, I know it's a tough one. I have to be honest with them about that very fact, about how not many places are hiring. They're letting people go. I always say talk to as many people as you can in radio veterans, get their opinions on things, get their take, pick their brains. Um, don't get into radio for the money. I mean, you can make good money, but not everybody does. You have to get into it because you have a passion for it. I know I did some teaching out at Seneca College many years ago, and I've attended classes of friends I know who teach out there, and you can look out into the crowd of 20 kids, and you can pick out the four that are going to make it. You can just tell by the way they're sitting there. And
Yeah.
I always say you got to have a passion for it. If you're getting into it because it sounds pretty cool, people are going to hear you. It sounds like an easy job. That's all the wrong reasons to get in. You have to have a passion for it. So I say to them, if you don't really have a passion for it, as we sit here and talk to each other right now, find something else to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you are fortunate to get in, uh, talk to the listener, not at the listener. I remember once Marilyn and Rick and I were doing a piece, and one of the salesmen came in and he said, "My wife was listening this morning, and she felt like she was eavesdropping at a party." And that hit me because I thought, that's not how she's supposed to feel. She's supposed to feel like we're talking to her. But to her,
Yeah.
it sounded like we were talking to each other, and she was, kind of eavesdropping. So,
Well, that's the thing is it's such a personal thing that it's, and again, going back to the fact doing the morning show, I mean, you're so intimate with those people, and you meet people after they've listened to you for 5, 6, 10 years, whatever it may be, here for 45 years, and they swear that they've known you for their entire life,
yeah,
and it, they can walk up to you and feel totally comfortable putting their arms around you, and you're thinking like, who is this person?
that's a great
But
compliment.
you've been, yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
But it's kind of a strange thing when you're not used to it at
Yeah,
first.
yeah. But, people say, you guys are like family to us. Is there any higher
Yeah.
compliment?
No, no. Well, I don't know, depending on your family dynamics, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the old. You don't look anything like you sound.
Oh yeah, of course. Oh yeah. Gee, you're such a
Yeah,
little guy with that big voice. Yeah. And then I always say, somewhat jokingly, but I say, never use the word folks. Hello, folks. Everybody listens with their own ears. You're talking to one person at a time.
yeah, that's right.
Nobody's like folks back in the 40s, maybe when you gathered around the radio to hear the latest soap opera or whatever it was. Maybe then, but I never do that. Even if I'm in front of a crowd on stage, I would never say folks. People don't listen as a group; they listen by themselves.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
One of the great things, and at the same time can be one of the disappointing things about being in radio, is you get to meet all these, in some cases, people who were your idols growing up, musicians, athletes, actors, etc. And the worst thing in the world is when you meet somebody that you love their music and you love their talent and you just think the world of them, and the person turns out to be a dick.
That's happened. Not very often, but you're right, it does, and it's really disappointing. If somebody says to me, "Can I have your autograph?" I get embarrassed right away because I think, "The hell would you want my autograph for?" But
Yeah,
I do. I give it to them because to say no, like
yeah.
sometimes you hear some of these movie stars, they say no. They roll up the window in the car. No. Wait, what? So that person now, for the rest of their lives, is going to tell that story about how so and so shunned them and wouldn't even give them an autograph.
Yeah.
If they had given the person an autograph, they would tell the opposite story and make the person seem like a real nice guy. So,
And if not for that person, you wouldn't be here.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So
I don't,
it's like talking about biting the hand that feeds you.
yeah, yeah. I
Who are
never
some,
understood that. I always, I always stop and talk to somebody if they wanted to talk to me.
who are some of the great people that you've met over the years that you really impressed, not only just for their talent, but for their personality, for the kinds of person that they
Number
were?
one, Tony Bennett.
I've heard that from a number of people.
Yeah, Tony Bennett. We met him, I think, around his 80th birthday, and he was calling me Raj after about 5 minutes. And it was so casual and comfortable. You could tell he liked being there. Here's a guy 80 years old. He really enjoyed being with us for 15, 20 minutes. Uh, and I said, why are you still doing this at your age? I can't remember how I put it. And he said, well, I said, this is what I do. And as I got older, after meeting him, I thought, well, he's right. That's what he does. So why would you stop doing it? And he loves to paint too, as you may know. But
Hmm.
yeah, he's number one. Mick Jagger would be number two. He was also very nice. We met him in Barbados,
I
and
don't know why that surprises me.
well,
Mick Jagger, not
yeah,
Tony Bennett, but Mick Jagger. I
yeah.
don't know why.
Well, I think I think it was under the circumstances because we used to take contest winners to Barbados. We went down there over 30 times,
Yeah.
and that was actually the first year we went that we found out Mick Jagger was on the island and he was recording at Eddie Grant's studio. Eddie Grant had bought an old plantation, had turned the
Hmm.
slaves' quarters into a studio, and left the
Wow.
rings in the wall, the metal rings where the slaves would be tied up. It was
Wow.
really something horrific to see, but he wanted that as a reminder. Nevertheless, there was a studio that he built there, and Mick Jagger was there recording at Eddie Grant's studio. And we knew people in the record industry who managed to get Ross Davies and myself. Ross was our program director at the time at Chum FM, to get the two of us in to meet Mick. So it was very casual. He's just hanging around this wonderful plantation, recording now and then. And we sat outside. The crickets were chirping, and we talked about music, and we actually talked about cricket because he's a big cricket fan. And after the interview, he said, "Well, I've got to get back into the studio." So he goes into the studio, and Ross and I are standing there, and Ross has got his camera with him. There's no phone cameras in those days, an actual little camera. And we thought, shit, we wanted to get a picture with Mick. We didn't do it. So we called back into the studio on the house phone and said, "Can Mick come out and have a picture taken with us?" And he said, "Sure." So he came out. So now the three of us are standing there with really no one to take the picture because whoever took the picture wasn't going to be in it. So Mick said, I'll find somebody. And he left for about 5 minutes and came back with one of the employees of the plantation, and she took our picture. So
Cool.
that's how giving he was. It was fantastic.
Yeah. You were around when Wolfman Jack used to come in to record his show
Oh
at
yeah.
Chum.
Oh God.
Chum radio with the Wolfman, and we gon' rock and roll, baby. It's about 2:31. We got Brother Love with us, and we gon' tear off Toronto. Hallelujah. We gon' charge you down. Everything we got is on the house.
Funny days.
I interviewed him once, very briefly, when I was at CFRB, and a fascinating guy, obviously. But you got to know him a lot better than I did over
Well,
the course of
I got
an
to
hour.
know him because I was the guy who was assigned to look after him when he came to Toronto.
Uh-oh.
So
And and you can actually remember those meetings.
yeah, some which I can't relate. But
Yeah, a little hazy.
I would go to the airport to meet him. And my wife
Yeah.
came with me once. So we both went out and then we get in the limousine. He's sitting in the middle in the back and we're on either side of him. He's smoking dope like crazy. But he was funny. He's loud, he's boisterous, and he's a funny man. So we take him down. He usually stayed at the Delta Chelsea Hotel. And so I got to know him each time he came to town. I remember one time I was to meet him at the hotel and I'm walking along College or Carlton, whatever it is there. What is it? Gerard, walking along Gerard, and there's a limo parked across the street, and the window's down about 3 or 4 inches, and I hear him go, Roger, Roger, I'm over here. It's Wolf. I'm over here. So there was also a time when he would come up once a month to record 3 shows and do one live. So they were weekly shows. He'd do one live and record 3 to get him through until the next time he came up. And one time that he was there, the Beach Boys were in town. So I was sent down to a hotel to pick up Mike Love and drove Mike Love up to Chum, and he sat in with Wolfman and did the show together. That was great because they
Yeah.
knew each other, of course, and here they are together in Toronto on the radio together. Oh, so good,
Yeah.
so good. Don Henley's one of my favorite performers. Love Don Henley.
Yeah.
Stevie Nicks. I don't think I ever met Linda Ronstadt, and I wish I had. I really admire not just her music, but her whole outlook on things.
What about people in radio that really, not necessarily people that you work with at Chum, but that it could include people that you worked with at Chum that really inspired you, that you respected as individuals and as broadcasters?
John Sprague for sure. When I was in high school, I listened to CKLW in Windsor a lot, and that was the break
Hmm.
format, which was something that I really enjoyed. So I liked a lot of those guys. They and they didn't talk a lot on those at that time in that format, but I really enjoyed them. One guy's name was Ed Mitchell, and I actually ran into him in a washroom at the Beverly Hilton hotels when I went down for a conference. And he was talking to somebody, and I thought, my God, that's Ed Mitchell. So I said, hello, you're Ed Mitchell. He said, yes. And he was very friendly. I met him. Uh, people that like Cousin Brucey in New York, some of the guys on WLS in the 60s. Bruce Bradley on WBZ in Boston was perhaps my. I never met these people, but he was very much a mentor when I was in high school. I just loved the way he approached his show, and Dick Summer, who used to be on WBZ on the All Night Show.
You know what's really impressed me is you watch broadcasters as they continue in their career and they have an expanded career that covers decades and decades, and you listen to how they started off and who they were when they started off and where they are now, and how much more impressed you are with them now, even though they're quote old. Guys like Howard Stern. Like, I was never a fan of Howard Stern when I first started hearing him because I thought it's just too crude and too base and childish humor. And now you listen to Howard Stern, and now he's become quite an exceptional interviewer
Yeah.
and a broadcaster. He's a different guy.
Hmm.
David Letterman is the same thing. If you look back in the old David Letterman shows when he used to follow Carson,
Hmm.
and look at his My Next Guest Now Needs
Hmm.
No Introduction shows that he
Right.
does on Netflix, he's matured into an outstanding
Yeah.
broadcaster.
Yeah, exactly. I know exactly what you mean. I agree with you. Howard Stern, I felt the same way as you, and I changed my opinion of him on 9/11. Because
Mm.
as you know, that happened at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we got off the air just as the second plane was about to hit, and I thought, who am I going to listen to? So I turned on Howard Stern. He's in New York, of course, and he was excellent. And you can't prepare for things like that. They just
No.
happen, and you've got to rise to the occasion. And he painted pictures of what was going on. He had people on the phone. He had guests come in. He talked to NBC columnists or reporters. He really did a bang up job, and that's when my opinion changed on him.
Which is a lesson to be learned from anybody who is considering a career in broadcasting. Get ready to do just about anything.
Yeah,
If you're one of those people who are getting into it just because you love music and you think I'm just going to be playing my favorite music for the rest of my life,
yeah.
good luck unless you're buying your own radio station, because the odds are the format's going to change or you're going to grow out of that format, and you better be able to adapt
Hmm.
and do something
Hmm.
else.
And that's good advice for people getting into the business. You're right. The day after 9/11, uh, we had to do a completely different kind of show because it was such a
Yeah.
tragedy. And Dr. Joy Brown she's an American talk show host. She was in Toronto because she couldn't get back to New York because there were no flights. So she
Hmm.
did her nationally syndicated show from our studios that morning. And we had the pleasure and opportunity of having her on our show to talk about it. So that really worked out well. And John Roberts, who used to be J.D. Roberts here in Toronto,
Sure.
we had contact information for him. We got a hold of J.D. and he was excellent in his reporting. So we put together a really good, thoughtful, serious show the next day because we had access to people. It was good.
And that's nothing that you could have ever prepared yourself
No,
for as a 10 or a 17-year-old kid in Bradford or Kitchener.
no, none of us could.
No.
No.
What were your thoughts when you heard that you were going to be inducted into the Canadian Music Broadcast Hall of Fame?
Well, first I was a little embarrassed because it's nice. It's great that I'm in the Hall of Fame, but I don't need that to make me feel that I've accomplished something. It's again, if
Right.
listeners say to me, "You're like family to us," that means just as much or more to me as any award that I could ever be given. Mind you,
Right.
I'm very proud of all the awards I've been given. I've got them plastered all over the walls here. And the
Yeah.
Hall of Fame was a wonderful, great experience, and it was a great night. I remember the speeches that everybody made, and yeah, it was quite an honor.
And then recently, I mean, I'm talking very recently, you were honored with a sign for your own street in Toronto.
you
And I
know,
think to myself, three of the legendary broadcasters in this city of Toronto have streets named after them. Wally Crowder, Jerry Howarth, and you. That's
wow,
pretty heady company.
I'm in good company. I sure am. Wow,
Yeah.
I never thought of that. Uh, well, when I left in 2018, I was told that they were going to make an application to the city to do that. And time went on. I never heard anything from anybody. I wasn't going to call up and say, "Hey, where's my street?" So I just thought, well,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
either fallen between the cracks or the city has not approved it, one or the other. So then
Yeah.
recently, like just maybe a month ago, I was downtown. I hadn't been in the station for years because of COVID, and I went in and I recorded a segment for Maryland's final week of shows, and they were having a little get together for our promotions guy, Dwayne Reed, who had been there 35 years. And they said, well, now that you've finished the Piece for Maryland show, and lucky you're here, you can come over and join Dwayne's little celebration. So I said, sure. So I couldn't stay for the whole thing, so I said to Sarah Cummings, I've got to go. Sorry, I got to go. And she said, well, one more thing before you go. And she brings out this sign with I got it right over here, Roger Ashby Way. And I thought, oh, it's become a reality. So even though I had been told 5 years ago it was going to happen, it was a big surprise when it finally did happen. So again, it's an honor to think that that's going to be up there. Well, I don't know how long, but
I think in one sense that's kind of a cooler honor than being part of the Hall of Fame.
yeah, well, maybe so.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm hoping that at best one day I'll get a speed bump named after me.
Oh, that's fantastic. I just say I wanted to tell you a story about when I retired. I got a lot of emails and texts from people congratulating me, people I hadn't heard from in a long time. But I got one from somebody you know. I got one from Charles Deering.
Wow.
And I had never met him.
Great guy.
Met him. But he sent me a note that was just so thoughtful. And it meant so much to me for a number of reasons, one of which is when I was 7 or 8 years old, I used to listen to Charlie Deering on CKPC in Brantford. He did a show from 7 to 8 that was like a top 40 show. Apart from that, the other 23 hours of the day, you never would have heard Elvis Presley. But he did a rock and roll radio show from 7 to 8 every night when I was 7, 8 years old. So that's how I knew Charlie Deering. And then he comes to Toronto. He's Charles Deering. He's the wonderful newscaster that he became. But I never met him. So to get that note out of the blue from him, he'd never met me. Why would he? I couldn't believe it. I was so honored to get that from him.
That's a cool story. That's a cool story. This has been a real pleasure chatting with you. I thank you very much for taking the time to do so. And God, we could talk about. Have you ever thought about writing a book? You've been approached.
Well, a lot of people have suggested that to me, but it's a pain in the neck. You know, first of all, you don't make much money from it. You don't do it for money.
No.
And I've got lots of stories I can tell about people I've met and things like that. And I'm happy to tell them to people in person, but I have no desire to sit down and try to put a book together and get publishing and I like telling my stories, but I'm not prepared to do a book.
Yeah.
How about you?
No.
No,
because I think that in order to do that and to do it properly, you have to be 100% honest. And to be 100% honest means that somewhere along the line you're going to hurt somebody's feelings.
Yeah.
And I'm at the point in my life where I don't really want to hurt anybody's feelings, and I'm at the point in my life where I don't want to BS.
Yeah. I think I feel the same way. Yeah.
I just want to keep working as long as I can keep working, and then eventually go downstairs and pull out the sea breeze.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like I'm doing that now with the microphone and the iPad.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, listen, Roger, thanks again very much, and take care. Look forward to listening to the Oldie Show. You can get it on iHeart. You can download the app and listen to it on a weekly basis.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ted. Enjoyed talking to you.
And thank you to all of you for tuning in and listening, and we hope that you'll join us again next week. And if you get a chance, drop by our website, www.tedwoloshin.ca, and there you will find a listing of all of our previous episodes. You can listen back to all of them. You can sign up and share your comments and thoughts with us. We would appreciate that. Also appreciate going online and check out the organ and tissue donation opportunities. You could change or even save a life. Have a great week.
The Ted Woloshyn Podcast has been brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. The Ted Woloshyn Podcast is produced by me, Becky Coles. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. For more information on this podcast and our sponsors, and to talk to Ted, go to www.tedwoloshyn.ca.